The definition of coastal resiliency from my coastal engineering perspective is a coastline that is able to give and take as nature changes the conditions. So there is no more dynamic place to try and live than on the coastline.
People like to build in exactly the most fragile and dangerous places. So the tensions between trying to preserve the resource base that exists in those places against folks' private property interests and rights and community development interests and rights really comes together in a compelling way.
A resilient community is one that recognizes that the beach is very dynamic, that it's going to look safe, flat, wide, inflated for a number of years, and it's going to look very dangerous for another number of years. But the key point is to recognize that independent of those movements back and forth, it is still constantly eroding at about a foot per year. The life of a mortgage, 30 years, you want to make sure that it's there to enjoy in future generations. There needs to be a big buffer.
Lake levels are also something that are monitored. We have records that go back almost 100 years or more in some cases. Right now, we have seen historically in the last 30 years or so a decline, but then they've rebounded again. So it's a cycle, and it's not clear that they're going to necessarily go up or down, at least in the near future. We like to think about the variability, and there's always that chance for a high followed by a low or vice versa. So it's important that when you're planning to actually be able to incorporate what does a high mean for your coastal city, what does a low mean. Can you be prepared for both?
The shape of the beach, both above water and below water, is constantly changing to the incident wave conditions and water level depths that we experience here in the Great Lakes. There will be years when you see very wide inflated beaches and years when you see very narrow and eroding beaches, and that is all part of the natural processes as the forcing functions that cause those things to happen vary over periods of 10 to 15 to 20 years.
Michigan is an interesting place because the Great Lakes are unique in the way they function and the way water levels come up and down. And that creates extra challenges for communities because they'll go through long periods when they're not really facing much risk from storm events or the way the lakes are flowing, and that can give you a false sense of security.
In terms of high levels, I know that coastal bluff erosion and just impacts to shorelines can be a major concern for a lot of areas, and then the loss of beach and the tourism industry and such like that can also be impacted. But when you have lows, you have less ability to access your boats or whatever it is that you're trying to launch into the water.
Being right on the shoreline is a dangerous place to be, and there needs to be mechanisms in communities to be able to enjoy the beach and the waterfront and all that it has to offer, but at the same time be able to give and take with those natural changes that are going to go on. I think we are beginning to impress upon these communities that working with the shoreline is really the way that everyone wins. The ability to work with nature versus trying to stop nature from changing things is incredibly important in terms of creating places that people really want to live in.